Rain threads itself down the length of the street, a steady silver seam that blurs the gaslight into a mellow halo. The little bookshop stands narrow between a pastry maker and a woolen draper, a square of warm amber against the damp dark. Its awning droops a little under the weight of the evening. The brass studs along its edge hiss with water. From the street one sees first the round of glass, then the faint tilt of type and spine within, and the knowing glow that says someone keeps vigil inside. Lilian moves in that glow as if it were a second skin. She prefers the light close to her shoulders, where the oil lamp throws a soft pool over the counter and the kettle sits, patient and ready. She lights the lamp with the same carefulness she gives to folding a page, finger steady, breath small. The wick answers with a thin, steady flame. The glassed chimney warms under her palm. The scent of oil, the faint tang of old glue and binding paste, and the deeper, sweeter smell of paper fill the room together. A familiar recipe that steadies her. She sets the kettle on the little spirit stove, an old brass thing with a comforted dent where a pot has rested for years. The kettle is a rounded, well-loved body, its handle smoothed by use. Its small whistle is more a suggestion than a shout. It takes its time to sing. Lilian moves to the counter and lays her hands on the spines lined like a congregation. Faded cloth with the patience of many fingers. Leather with tiny hairline creases. Gilt letters that have kept their own small fires. Her fingers travel names she knows by touch. First a thin poetry volume, then a child's book with an ink-stamped note, then a ledger she uses to mark small, unremarkable moments. Who bought which second-hand volume? Who left a penny on the shelf for a child? A line of thanks penned with an awkward hand. Outside, the rain shifts its tempo. Sometimes a delicate patter, sometimes a steady cloth dragged over glass. The sound is a kind of clasping, a continuous finger tap that smooths the edges of the day. Lilian listens and lets the sound set the measure for her work. The kettle's eventual sigh, the hourglass she turns at certain rites of evening, the little scrape of the brass scale as she weighs leaves of tea. She is not hurried by clocks so much as by these domestic instruments that speak in softer units of time. A sand glass stands on the counter, a small reliquary of past minutes. Its sand is pale as bone. When it begins to fall, it sings in a very small private way. Lilian turns it now and watches the beads collect and thin, thinking of time as a string of small acts. Warm tea, a mended page, a spoken memory, more than as a stern line on a municipal clock. The lamp hums. The shop inhales and exhales with the kettle's patient breath. This is how she keeps the city at bay, by making small, hands-on things that ask for attention. A soft knock at the door is like a punctuation mark in the room, tidy and expected. The bell over the door gives a single clear peal, not the jangling of a newer place, but a polite, rounded sound that echoes once and settles. Mr. Seamus steps in, the shock of his tweed cap still ringed with rain, his cane leaving a damp crescent on the mat. He is small and stooped, with a jaw like weathered wood, and eyes that have learned to find the familiar in a dim shop. "Evening, Miss Lilian," he says, his voice a dry, slow thing that warms the air like toast. He does not come to the counter empty-handed. In a pocket near his heart is always a scrap, a newspaper clipping, a pressed leaf, a ticket stub from a cheap theater. Tonight he produces, with a ceremonious care, a small folded scrap of paper on which he has written, in a hand that stumbles but holds, a recollection. an old tale about a bench by the river, about a particular day that had a sun like a coin. He offers it to her, as if the memory were an offering on a tray. Lilian takes it and tucks it into a ledger margin where she keeps small mementos like this. She listens as he tells the memory in parts he repeats each visit, not for lack of new content, but because the repetition is a kindness. It ties him to this place the way a seam ties two fabrics. A little later, Rose arrives, trailing the green of her work. She smells faintly of damp soil and citrus peel. In the crook of her arm, she carries a basket of bulbs cushioned against her apron. Rose moves with the kind of hands that know how to coax life from earth. Gentle, decisive, familiar. She sets the basket down by the window and presses a damp thumb against a pot of rosemary as though to reassure it. Her hair is tied with a strip of woven ribbon, and the hem of her skirt carries flecks of compost like quiet metals. She and Lilian exchange a small, private language about light and humidity, about which plants fare under gaslight, about how waxed paper can hold a cut stem's secret. Rose speaks of a bulb that refused to flower until this very morning, and the two women share a smile that is all encouragement and understanding. Behind them in the corner, Mara and Joss, two local children who help around the shop for a crust and their own small pleasures, have arranged themselves on a low stool with paper and scissors. They move in the subdued hush of a place where sound is treated like glass. Careful, measured. Their small hands fold and crease with a patience that belies their age, cutting shapes that will become the paper windows they bind into strings later in the evening. They whisper to each other in a private shorthand, small conspiracies about which colors catch the lamplight best. When Lilian nods approval, they beam like two little lanterns. Other neighbors drift in at intervals. A seamstress with a half-finished cuff pinned to a basket. A bookbinder who brings the smell of paste and warmed leather. A quiet man who lives 2 doors down with a sack always full of useful things. Buttons, brass rings, odd lengths of cord. Each arrival is a soft poem. Its lines the exchange of a recipe for tea, a tale about an ailing cat that has learned to sleep on someone's doorstep, a suggestion about where to mend a particular wear in a binding. They all converge here under this awning, not because they must, but because the shop makes a clear kind of shelter. It gathers things and people that fare well in close warmth. Lilian tends each guest the way one tends a small plant, checking the light, offering an encouraging word, turning a page away from a draft. She pours tea into thin, chipped cups, watching the steam lift like a small conjuring. The sound of spoons on the side of cups is like rain in miniature. When she sets a tin of biscuits on the counter, there is a chorus of quiet thanks that is nearly a prayer, though it is not spoken as such. The shop is full of the rituals of ordinary care, and it is these rituals that stitch her life to the lives of others. If you like, stay with this drift a little longer. There is a rhythm to the coming and going. An entry followed by a small conversation, a moment to share what has been saved from the day, a return to the lamp. The hourglass is turned again at some point without fanfare. Sand trickles like a metronome only heard by those who listen. Lilian arranges books while she makes tea, pressing a set of pamphlets to the front in honor of a visiting scholar who once taught her to read a passage aloud. She straightens a display of travel guides, runs the smooth edges of a binding with the tender touch one uses on a sleeping child. Each book has its own small history, fingerprints at certain pages, a pressed flower between 2 covers, a thumb outline on a map where someone once traced a route in thought. Mr. Seamus draws up his stool and, as he always does, asks for the same corner seat that overlooks the street. From there, he watches the world walk by under umbrellas, counting the passing coats and the variety of hat brims. He gives Lilian a small report, made up of trivial facts that, once assembled, make a kind of cartography of the neighborhood. Rose brings a pot of hyacinth in a cracked teacup and plants it in the shop window, tucking soil over the bulb with a small, sure hand. Mara and Joss, entrusted briefly with the task of setting a paper garland, climb onto the back of a wooden chair to reach the cornice. The seamstress diffuses a faint scent of starch as she folds a piece of linen, and the bookbinder hums as he mulls over a repair. Between these vignettes of ordinary life, Lilian pauses to remember. Memory is not a thing she hoards. It is a tool she uses in the making of comfort. She recalls a winter the awning hung heavier than it does now, and how she learned to stitch a leather strap back in place by the light of the stove. She remembers the first time she bought the sand glass, saving coin by coin until it was hers, and how watching the sand fall taught her to breathe more patiently. A teacher, Mrs. Halford, an elderly woman with a lorgnette and a voice like dry bread, once showed her how to sew an invisible seam, and Lilian, keeping that technique in the hollow of her palm, has stitched many things since. Hems, the frayed edges of a binding, a neighbor's rent paper envelope. The warmth in the shop is not only from the lamp, but from small, ongoing labors. A coal brazier, set low and careful, sends a little chimney of heat into the room. When Lilian stokes it, the coals respond like an old companion. The kettle huffs as steam negotiates its way out of the spout, a soft, piping exhale. The consistent hum of the city outside, hushed wheels, muffled voices beneath umbrellas, becomes a backdrop, never intrusive. Inside, the night is cushioned. It is when the light has dipped lower, and the street sounds seem muffled by the rain, that Lilian notices the awning's seam. It is a small thing at first, a loose stitch that has unpicked itself somewhere near the brass ring where the canvas meets the wood. She might have ignored it. There are mornings she will leave such threads to the slow passage of a day. But the sound of rain makes seams talk. A drip begins where the canvas fails to meet the frame. A bead of water finds its way down the awning's underside and, with a polite, almost apologetic tick, finds the rim of the window. Lilian draws the curtain aside slightly and spots the tiny glint of a crack in the lower pane, hairline and shaded by the steam. It is the sort of thing that would have time to rest on a winter morning, but tonight, with the rain insistent and the awning promising shelter, it is a patchwork of worry. The thought of it pricks her chest like a needle. A small thing, but revealing. Repair is needed. She does what she always does when she notices repair is needed. She notices the people present first. There is no rush. The seam becomes part of the room's texture. She takes a breath and brings more tea. Mr. Seamus leans forward knowingly when she mentions it, offering a fragment of a memory about a similar tear in a jacket he once mended. Rose glances at the awning, as if at a plant browning at the edge. She suggests waxed cloth and an idea about a double seam. The bookbinder nods toward a length of linen tape he has brought for binding, and the seamstress, eyes calculating, proposes a careful hand-stitch that will keep the awning's dignity intact. Their conversation is easy, almost ritualized. No one speaks as though rushing to fix an emergency. The talk takes its time to collect materials in the mind. Leather, thread, wax, starch, a small hammer for the brass studs. Lilian counts what she has, turning over on the counter a small tray of tools she keeps by the register. A spool of thread the color of rain, a box of needles in various sizes, a length of thin brass wire, a scrap of oilcloth she uses to show a patch. Each object is small, familiar, and named in the way things are named that are loved. The children offer their hands with an eager hush. Mara, whose fingers are deft from swapping pages and tying parcels, can stitch a button in a blink. Joss is better with scissors and can shape a pattern as if it were a compass. They promise to be careful. The bookbinder fetches a roll of linen tape. The seamstress unties the small tin of beeswax from her basket. Rose brings waxed paper, not modern cellophane, but a thin oiled muslin used in wrapping florals against damp. The quiet neighbor from 2 doors down produces a small coil of brass wire and a heap of button-off cuts that shine like tiny coins. And yet, as they catalogue, Lilian finds herself considering something else. A single patch might do the job, snug the canvas, stanch the drip, but there is another possibility, one more delicate, more ceremonious. If the tear is to be mended, why not make it sing instead of hiding it? The thought is not grandiose. It is domestic imagination. They could reinforce the seam with leather, sturdy and true. But why not attach a row of small paper windows, hung like tiny charms, to catch the lamplight? Why not turn a repair into a small celebration? Such an idea would not only keep the rain out, it would send light back out into the street, warm and inviting, a line of tiny panes to scatter the lamp's glow. The suggestion meets with soft, approving murmurs. Mr. Seamus smiles as if remembering a light he once saw in a different street. Rose's eyes brighten with images of hyacinths threaded with candlelight. The seamstress nods, considering how the sewn paper might be edged in linen tape to weather the damp. The children clap in a restrained way, delighted by the notion of making something both useful and pretty. Lilian feels the idea settle in her chest like settled tea. It fits. Tools are gathered with a careful economy. The bookbinder removes an old leather strap from his satchel, rubbing it between his fingers as if testing its memory. The seamstress draws out a needle that sits mid-sized and sure. The quiet neighbor hands over an old spool of thread, its length reveled and still pleasant to the touch. Rose offers rolls of colored paper she keeps for wrapping stems on market mornings. Thin, translucent sheets that let lamplight bloom through them. They are the right weight for a paper window. Not too fragile, not too bright. Mara and Joss set up a small makeshift bench by the counter where light falls best. Lilian passes them scissors and a small pot of glue warmed gently to a consistency that will not peel in damp weather. As preparations begin, the shop changes subtly. Sound shifts from the steady rain drum to the soft, insistent chorus of small craft. Scissors whispering against paper, the needle making a muted punctate music as it draws thread through canvas, a tiny scrape of leather against wood. The kettle sighs again, almost at once, and Lilian topples a spoonful of sugar into the tea, stirring in a broad, slow circle. The lamp's flame flutters as someone moves past it with a paper pattern. The sand glass, turned once more by instinct rather than schedule, makes a thin, final sound before the last of the upper grains find their place. In the corner, Mr. Seamus tells a tale he has shaped into the form of this shop's own history. A yarn about a time when he and a friend tied lanterns along a neighbor's parapet to steer a lost driver. It is an unnecessary tale for the work, but it keeps the mood warm. Rose hums softly as she cuts the paper, and the seamstress mends as she speaks, her hands a practice of economy and beauty in the same gesture. The bookbinder works mostly with his back turned, fingers moving over the leather with a craftsman's intimacy, his mouth shaping to himself the directions of a repair. Lilian supervises with the calm authority of someone who knows that small things, attended to in the same spirit, become strong. She offers a stitch here, a suggestion there, a measure of wax to rub along the thread so that it will slide like a sleepy cat. She thinks of the awning not as mere shelter, but as a face the shop shows the street, and she wants it to wear a kindly expression. The plan comes together. A leather-reinforced seam beneath the canvas, covered by a band of linen tape, and, above that, a row of small paper windows strung along a length of twine, fixed with brass studs and padded so the draught cannot find its way in. Each little window will be edged with a stitched hem, linen over paper, so the damp will not fray it too quickly. When the lamplight falls, the paper will glow like soft glass. There is a sense in the room of stepping into an old custom, mending as ceremony. The group moves in unhurried synchrony. The children cut shapes, tiny rectangles and panes, while the adults set to heavier tasks. The bookbinder and the quiet neighbor take the awning down with the same careful method they would use to unlace a book. The seamstress measures, marking a line with a pencil of chalk. The sound of rain continues, a steady underpinning that never quite stops their hand. Sometimes a broader gust makes the lamp flame lean. Somebody reaches to steady it without words. The shop breathes together, and the work makes the breath itself slow. As they begin to unfasten the awning, Lilian notices something else, an irregularity in the frame where a small nail has rusted through near the corner. It is an old blemish. In another season it would be a trivial thing, easily remedied. Tonight, with the fabric wet and the stitch readied, it is a complicating detail. The nail will need replacing. A better grommet must be found to secure the stud. It is the sort of practical hitch that turns a simple mend into a longer chore, a necessary pause, yet the discovery does not sour the mood. If anything, it deepens it. Tools are fetched, plans adjusted. They decide to repair in the shop rather than outside, to keep the lamp near and the coals tending. The awning is laid across the long work table, its underside exposed like a map of wear. The canvas gives up a smell of wet linen and older dust. The leather strap feels waxed and firm beneath their fingers. The hole shows itself to be larger than first imagined, and the crack in the window is more settled than the steam had allowed them to see. Lilian pauses, inhaling the mingled scents of damp fiber and beeswax, and for a moment she thinks of the evening a fortnight ago when a child's laughter drew up from the street into this very window and made the room bright as any day. She collects that small memory like a talisman, and then she sets to work with the rest. The bookbinder smooths leather. The seamstress threads her needle and secures beeswax along the length. Rose flattens strips of oiled muslin to patch the inner side. Mr. Seamus offers steady hands to hold the awning in place at the right angle. The children, trusted now with a precise duty, pin the paper windows to a length of twine, each one folded and glued, and then edged with linen tape. They work with a kind of concentrated joy that turns their faces into the light's soft reflection. Every stitch, every press of a thumb becomes part of a larger, gentle choreography. Midway through, as a strand of twine is stretched and a series of tiny windows hangs like a miniature street from the counter to the display shelf, a hush settles. The rain, which has been speaking all evening, seems to lean in, quieter as if eavesdropping on the repair. Lilian runs her hand along a fresh seam she has just sewn, feeling the small, reassuring rise of thread against skin. A drop from the awning falls onto the work table and is caught by a square of blotting paper. The drop spreads like a small painted pupil and is then absorbed, nothing dramatic. They pause for tea. The ritual returns to center stage, and with it the simple pleasure of shared cups and biscuits. As they drink, a neighbor places on the counter a small, warm loaf from the baker, surplus, kindly, and someone else brings a pot of plum jam pressed earlier in the week. The bookbinder tells of a man who once bound a broken compass as if it were a book, and the tale is all about making and the dignity of mending. These little stories knit the evening together as surely as the needle sews the canvas. There is laughter, too, small and comfortable. Mr. Seamus loses his needle twice and finds it again within his sleeve. The seamstress jokes about her own impatience with neatness, and Rose corrects her with a smile and a patient hand. The children teach the older ones a folding technique for the paper that produces a more luminous window. Lilian, pleased, keeps the larger pieces and tucks the smaller, more delicate panes into a box, as if she were keeping the night's lanterns safe. As the repairs continue, dawn is an unthinkable event in the far hours ahead. The shop inhabits the night entirely. Street lamps shape puddles into wide moons on the road, and through the mended frame and the beginnings of the paper windows, lamplight finds itself bending into little, patterned glows on the floor. The process becomes less about fixing and more about giving voice to light. They work with whispered humor, with small histories told in fragments. Each person brings a story about a mend once accomplished, how a father taught his child to knot, how a neighbor once sewed a uniform back together before a boy's first day at work. Soft tales that have the slow cadence of bedtime stories told in the glow of a half-lamp. Yet, even amid the hum, a note of attention remains. The cracked pane requires a more delicate hand. It will need to be removed from the frame and set aside while the new grommet is fitted. That is a job for the bookbinder, whose hands have the right balance of firmness and tenderness. He measures the glass by touch and declares a plan that is precise and modest. Slip it out, clean the jam, fit a small strip of oak he keeps for small frames, and then pin the pane back in with fresh putty. The children watch the movements with the awe of apprentices, leaning forward at the sight of an old craft made deliberate and slow. Lilian feels both satisfaction and the little ache that comes when an evening's work stretches longer than expected. Repairs always do, she thinks. A thing that is whole tells the story of being kept together. Her own hands, dusted with fine fibers from the canvas and the leather, carry the memory of an earlier life. Long mornings bent over teachers' scripts, summers when she mended books for less pay and more pleasure. Now she passes those techniques on in small gestures. How to pull a thread without catching the fibers. How to roll a paper edge with the pad of a thumb so it will not split. Where to place a brass stud so it will bear strain rather than merely ornament. They speak in this productive hush, but the talk sometimes wanders away from the task, into recollections and soft confidences. Rose says she once grew a hyacinth so fragrant that the whole house seemed to hold its breath. The seamstress confesses a small fear of thunderstorms that she hides by humming old lullabies while she works. Mr. Seamus tells of a bench he once slept upon and woke to find the city kind to him in the most ordinary ways. Lilian listens and tends the conversation as one tends a small flame. Not allowing it to leap, but letting it grow warm and steady. Outside, the rain continues its accompaniment, an unflagging hand on the panes. The street beyond the window runs with dark reflections of gaslight and the occasional figure under an umbrella. From time to time, someone passes, pausing to peer at the new little windows as they begin to hang, their shapes simple but promising. Each glance is a blessing. The street itself starts to notice the shop's effort, and the shop replies with an extra measure of light. By the time the larger repairs are half done, there is a sense of an evening properly spent. The awning lies mostly stitched, and the leather reinforcement holds like an embrace. The brass studs have been set, and the linen tape tucks neatly under the seam. The children's paper windows hang now in a draped length across the counter, like a small parade of miniature houses, their edges still raw and glistening with glue. The cracked pane remains to be reset. The bookbinder has made the oak strip, and is poised to fit it once a precise putty has set to the right tackiness. Everything waits for that moment of finishing to line up. The right tension in thread, the right firmness in putty, the right curl of the paper's edge once dry. The room breathes as work pauses. Hands are washed at the little basin behind the counter. Tea is topped up. Crumbs are brushed into a palm and given to a cat that has crept in and settled on the window seat. Lilian straightens the sand glass again, watching the pale grains begin their patient fall. She thinks of the awning in its new guise, the seam now strong underneath, and the paper windows catching light from inside out. She can already imagine the soft pattern they will throw upon wet stone, a false street of tiny panes, warm against the drizzle. There is no hurry to finish. The shop has become, in this one night, a place of slow making, and the making itself is a kind of song. Outside, a lone lamplighter trudges past with his pole, a ghostly figure against the washed street. In his wake, the light bends and the paper windows answer in miniature. Lilian makes a note to set aside a small pot of extra glue in case the damp wants to take one or two of the fragile panes. She ties the scrap of the awning to the ledger, so that later she will remember the exact color of the canvas. They agree, by common consent, to take a final, careful pause before the last steps. The finalities of mending require both concentration and a fresh hand. A moment's rest will let each of them return with steadier fingers. The lamp is trimmed, the coals pushed together, the kettle left to a low simmer. The room is warm enough now that no one needs to be huddled too close. It is in this pause, when tools are set back into their small boxes and the paper windows sway slightly with the stillness, that a small, unexpected sound reaches the threshold. A soft tapping at the door, not the bell, but a light knock, as if someone has reconsidered and decided to ask permission to enter. The sound is polite and tentative, a little like the patter of rain, but shaped into a question. Lilian looks toward the door, the muscles at the back of her neck easing as she realizes this is merely another neighbor, perhaps a late caller with a want or a gift. She rises to answer, moving with the same unhurried deliberation she has kept all evening. The others settle back into the moment, a spoon poised over a cup, a hand idling over a length of thread. The sand glass continues its measured descent, and the lamp throws one last clear pool of light across the work table before Lilian reaches the latch and opens the door to whatever night offers next. Lilian draws the latch with a slow, deliberate motion, and the door opens on a small figure bent against the rain. A man she knows by name, and by the way his pockets rattle with small things. Mr. Talbot, who keeps the mending bench on the next street, stands there with a wooden box under his arm, its lid damp at the corners. He lifts his hat and shakes a little water from the brim as if to apologize to the knight for having come late. "Evening, Miss Lilian," he says, his voice a warm timbre lined with the carefulness of someone who has learned to be gentle with fragile things. On his breath is the smell of boiled linseed oil and old iron. "Thought you might be wanting one of these." He sets the box on the threshold and opens it with a reverence usually saved for instruments. Inside is a tidy array, small brass grommets, an awl with a handle smoothed by many hands, a leather punch, a slender mallet with a head darkened by use, and a roll of stout waxed thread. There is also a neat coil of thin wire, and a small tin of putty softened for working. Lilian notices with a lightness in her chest that he has also brought a strip of oak he had left over from a window repair earlier in the week, sanded and ready as though it had been waiting. They exchange a few quiet words. How the rain has kept him late. How his wife mended a boot and stared at a patch until it looked proud. And then they settle back into the lamp-lit room, as if the door were a curtain between two halves of the same house. Mr. Talbot places the box on the work table with the precise calm of a man setting down something important. The work resumes as if it had only paused to consider its next breath. The bookbinder fits the oak strip into the frame with a craftsman's patience, sliding the glass free without a sound. It is a careful maneuver. Lift, support, ease. The cracked pane comes away with a small, careful click like the closing of a delicate hinge, and the bookbinder's palms glint with a little wet from the rain. He rests the pane on a cloth, wipes it with a soft rag, and lays it aside to be set back in order. Lilian, Mr. Talbot, and the others stand close, crowding the work table with their shoulders like a protective circle. Mr. Talbot measures the old nail hole and selects a brass grommet the size of a small coin. He marks the canvas where the new grommet will sit, using the awl to make a precise, tiny hole. The sound is a single, quiet puncture that holds the attention rather than startling it. His hands are steady and sure. The awl moves with a small, exacting rhythm. Beeswax is rubbed along the thread the seamstress holds. The wax gives the stitch a smoothness that lets the fiber slide and resist the damp. Lilian threads the needle and draws the stitch through the canvas in a sequence she has practiced 100 times. Under, over, pull, firm but not cruel. The thread catches the light and then sinks. It is an almost invisible ladder that when drawn tight brings two edges of canvas together like the closing of an eyelid. Each stitch becomes a tiny promise that will hold against wind and water. The bookbinder, with the oak strip fitted, cleans the window's jam of old putty, smoothing the new compound with a small, flat tool until the joint looks like a seam that always belonged. The children are given the task of preparing the paper windows for attachment. Under Lilian's guidance they fold and glue with solemnity. Lilian shows them how to crease the edge so that the paper holds without splitting, how to press the glue thinly with a bone folder so the seam does not pucker, how to allow a breath of space for drying. Mara, precise and small, edges the panes with a strip of linen tape that hugs the paper like a cuff. Joss, whose hands make quick, broad gestures, strings the twine while singing a tiny invented tune under his breath. A pattern of notes that slips into the repair like a talisman. There is a careful choreography to the setting of the grommet. Mr. Talbot places the brass ring into the hole, then the washer, and with a soft, measured strike of the mallet, the metal receives its seat. The mallet's blow is muffled by the table, the sound more felt than heard, and then the grommet rests as if it has always been there. The seamstress binds the linen tape over the leather reinforcement with a neat line of hidden stitches, and the bookbinder presses the oak strip into place and offers the pane back to its frame. When the glass slips into its well once more, the jamb closed with new putty dried to a gentle tack. There is a small shared intake of breath that smells faintly of linseed and warmed dust. While some finish the heavier tasks, others attend to the ornaments. They decide together on the length and spacing of the paper windows. They choose colors that are modest and kind: a pale saffron, a soft moss, a tender rose, and a sheet of translucent white that learns to look like glass. Lilian shows how the lamplight will catch differently on each tint, how the saffron will warm the pavement farthest, how the moss will deepen shadows into something like a comforting map. The children make little shutters for some of the panes, folded flaps that can be opened to let more light through or closed to keep out the damp. As they work, small stories and small instructions pass hand to hand. Rose tells of a way to dry a bulb without bruising it. Roll in clean newspaper, set near the heat but not on it. And Mr. Seamus, who has temporarily misplaced his dignity and his concentration, describes with a shy pleasure the exact way a bench feels after rain has dried on its slats. Each utterance is an apprentice piece of knowledge, passed without fanfare, as if the sharing itself were the point. The work continues into a ripple of small motions and low conversation. The lamp burns steady, its wick fed by an even hand. The kettle sighs sometimes and offers a whispered steam that fogs the window for a breath. The sand glass is turned again at intervals, its granular sound a companion so quiet one might miss it if not listening. The house cat moves from lap to lap, accepting crumbs and warm palms, adding its soft purr as an extra stitch in the night's quilt. At length the awning is reattached. The leather seam is strong and sure. The linen tape lies flat and clean. The brass studs shine where they meet the new band of paper windows strung on twine. The bookbinder screws the last small stud in place with a gentle hand. When the awning lifts once more and is hoisted to its position, the paper windows hang from the awning like a miniature street. An idea realized, not over-flourished, each pane blinking in lamplight. They stand back and look at the shop from within as if seeing it for the first time. The light is different now. It is sliced through colors and spreads upon the shelves in ribboned hues. The leather spines catch a warm tint. A map, folded in a far corner, now holds a patch of saffron that looks like a small sunset. Mr. Seamus, solemn with a childlike delight, walks to the window and peers out, counting the puddles as though they were newly discovered islands. A couple passing under umbrellas slow their tread, their faces caught by the small, honest display, and they pause long enough for the warmth to reach out and touch them. They celebrate in the modest manners of people who have made something by hand. The seamstress produces a small parcel from her basket, a wedge of cheese wrapped in paper and tied with string. Rose brings more hyacinths, their heads damp with the cool of the evening, and their scent folds the room in a faint, sweet ache. Lilian passes plates and cups. Steam curls, and the smell of plum jam returns. They eat and make small toasts without raising their voices, to the awning, to the children's clever hands, to the city that allows such nights. The bookbinder, with his penchant for soft tales, tells of a binding he once saved that had a single torn leaf. He stitched it back so gently the tear learned to look like a deliberate decoration. His story is not a boast, but an example, and it lands among them like a blessing. Mr. Seamus, who cannot help a flourish even when he intends to be modest, recounts how once he and a friend had strung lanterns for a childish procession, and how, in the light, even strangers seemed kin. Each anecdote is a little lamp in itself, and the room gathers them. As the evening grows later, the pace slackens into a calm that is almost reverential. The last of the putty is smoothed, the final bit of linen pressed, and the paper window's edges are tucked so they will not fray. The children run a final finger along the string and pronounce the work finished with a seriousness that is both amusing and deeply sincere. Lilian steps back, allowing a small pride that does not shout but glows. She thinks of how repair changes the story of an object. It does not return things to a pristine state, but gives them a new history, a further reason to be walked by hands and noticed by eyes. Outside, a boy with a cart pauses to look. Inside, a neighbor dares a quiet clap. No one makes a show. The pleasure is small and mutual. They all know the value of such quiet accolades. The awning, now mended and ornamentally modest, becomes a kind of modest proclamation. Here is a shop, tended, a light kept, a shelter for those who wish it. The paper windows, though fragile, hold the lamplight and send it back out to the street as if to say that the city is inhabited, watched over by people who care for its smallest wounds. There is a pause in which they breathe with each other, and the sand-glass makes its last pale sound. Someone hums, a low, private tune, soft as a closing phrase of a poem, and the rhythm moves through the group. Hands are washed, tools are returned to their boxes, glue pots are sealed. The coals in the brazier are banked low and tender, the lamp's chimney is wiped, and the shelves are dusted with a light hand so the newly thrown color is not clouded. Lilian counts the night's small victories with a small ledger in her head. A pane reset, an awning mended, 24 paper windows made, a neighbor's favor returned, a loaf shared. She thinks of the way the shop has held together the city's quiet edges, how a place so small can form a pattern for many lives, and she experiences a softness that is nearly gratitude, but steadier, like a gentle acceptance that this is how the world should be sometimes. As the last visitor drifts away, wrapped again in the rain's shawl, the street exhales. Footsteps thin out, the muffled clatter of cartwheels becomes a memory, and the world outside the shop begins to sink deeper into night. The paper windows glow faintly, and through them little bands of color fall across the shelves like a chorus of tiny flags. The cat curls on a stack of postcards, its purr like a distant sewing machine going slow. Lilian moves to tidy. She shelves a pile of pamphlets with a tenderness that treats each as a small person returning home. She straightens a tower of second-hand novels so that their spines stand like a disciplined row of acquaintances. She runs the pad of her thumb along the edge of a map to find the exact place where a young man once stood and traced his route. Small things catch her eye. A receipt folded in a neat hand that reads, "For a girl who loves stars." A scrap of ribbon stuck in the pages of a traveler's book. A child's inked finger smudge on a margin. She tucks these into an anonymous drawer that seems to collect the neighborhood's small confidences. She sets the sand-glass by the lamp as a marker. Tonight she will let it run 3 times before she climbs to her attic room. It is a ritual without strict reasoning. It is simply how she measures the end of a worthy evening. The first turn is for clearing and thankfulness. The second for small restings, wiping the counters, laying out a slice of bread for the morrow. the third for a breath that contains the day and lets it go. The first run of sand falls with its pale, patient sound. She counts nothing but the falling, and lets the quiet of the room fill with light, and the sense of things put right. When the hourglass is turned the second time, Lilian places small treats into a pot by the door, a handful of biscuits wrapped in grease-proof and sealed with a neat fold. She labels a scrap of paper for late wanderers and tucks it under the candle holder. There will be people who pass this way in the earliest hours. A lamplighter on his rounds, a choir boy with late rehearsal, a tired cleaner of the bakery upstairs. She likes the idea that someone might find warmth without asking. The last glass she turns slowly, with a certain ceremony. She stands and looks once more at the mended awning and its humble parade of paper windows. The light inside will be lower soon. She will put out the oil lamp in the shop before she lies down, keeping only a small night lamp in her attic so she can read a page or two if sleep tends to be slow. The sand glass's last grains clatter softly, and when they settle she lifts it and sets it back in its place on the counter like an agreed punctuation. She moves through the room in obedient motions, sweeping crumbs into a dustpan, straightening a cushion on the window seat, wiping the counter with a cloth that smells faintly of lemon and starch. She pauses to press a finger to one of the paper panes, feeling the warmth where the lamplight has kissed it. For a moment she allows a small ongoing thought, a memory of being taught by Mrs. Halford to mend a tear with care, a recollection of the first time she turned a page in a book that felt like a doorway. And she acknowledges how those old teachings have multiplied into the fabric of tonight. The attic stair is steep and narrow, and as she climbs she feels the day's work settle into her arms. The attic is small and plain, with a bed tucked under the eaves and a single oil lamp on a bedside table. A thin patchwork quilt covers the bed. It is stitched from remnants of old cloths and corners of happier garments, each square carrying a faint memory. A seam from a dance dress, the edge of an apron, a scrap from a child's first shirt. She smooths the quilt with a hand that has just been full of thread and glue and brushes a few stray fibers away. Before she blows out the lamp, she opens the attic window a little to let the rain speak directly to her, unmediated by glass. The air is clean and carries the scent of wet cobbles, of coal smoke rolling away, of something green from Rose's hyacinths. The lamplight from the shop below paints a soft rectangle across the fogged street. Lilian sits on the edge of the bed for a moment, hands folded, the quiet of the room a small, obedient thing. She allows herself a ritual the way other people might say a prayer. She breathes in, slow, deliberate, counting to 3 in her mind, then lets the air out through a long, pleased exhalation. She feels the tension at the base of her neck loosen, the shoulders descend. She repeats this a few times, the breath like a stitch closing the day's seam. The attic is full of small sounds, a distant carriage, the rain on the eaves, a night insect struck mute by the cold. Each is unremarkable, and together they form a lullaby. Lilian places the small lamp on the bedside table and draws the quilt up to her chin. She thinks, not in sentences so much as in soft images. The paper windows glowing like tiny fires, the bookbinder's hands neat as origami, Mr. Seamus's laugh like the rattling of small coins. She attends to the feeling that she has lived a day that answered to its own work, that cared for the world in a modest, useful way. In the dark beneath the eaves, her eyes close. Her mind drifts not toward the city's concerns, but to the little people in their hands. The seamstress holding a needle, Rose with a pot of bulbs, the children's secret folding methods, all of them a choir of small, competent gestures. She feels the shop's warmth sink into the structure of the house, as if the building itself has softened. Below, the paper windows glow in the rain, sending light like a string of soft invitations out to the street. If you like, you may make yourself as comfortable as Lilian makes herself tonight. Sit or lie as you prefer. Draw the corners of your shoulders down away from your ears. Feel the hands of the day unclasp. Take a slow, deep breath in. Fill your ribs gently. Hold and let it go, allowing your exhale to be longer than the inhale. Notice the rhythm of your breathing. Let it become the small sand glass in the chest, steady and forgiving. Imagine now the sound of rain the way it comes across Lilian's window, a hush that keeps nothing urgent from entering, a soft hand upon the pane. Picture a single pool of lamplight spilling across wet stone, small bands of color caught and softened by the glimmer of paper. Think of a seam mended so carefully that it feels like an old friend wrapped in fresh cloth. Let those images arrange themselves in a slow procession like books on a shelf. Each one gentle, each one known. Allow your eyelids to be heavier now, as if the lamplight has already left them to rest. If stray thoughts arrive, name them briefly. Thought, memory, to-do, and then let them float away on the rain. You might imagine, as you drift, the soft shape of the shop window seen from the pavement, its row of paper panes catching the lamp and throwing a patient light onto those who pass. Picture someone opening the door in the morning and finding that the town's small worry has been transformed into something warming, something that says, simply, that people were here and they cared. There is nothing left to do now but to be still. Let your breath find its own small, steady measurement. Feel the blanket of the night settle across you, comforting as a patchwork quilt stitched from many small, generous hands. Know that, like the awning and the pane and the paper windows, the day's troubles have been tended and set to right. They will weather and be remembered only as part of the life of things. When you are ready, allow sleep to come as Lilian allows it, without haste, without demand, with a soft, small gratitude for the company of the evening. The rain will keep its steady count. The lamp will keep its low glow until the house asks it to rest, and the paper windows will keep their quiet watch. In the morning, new light will find different colors in the panes. For now, the night holds, and you may go with it. If this evening's hush suited you, a quiet like or a gentle subscription helps us bring more nights like this.